It's Waxing Lyrical, baby.
Hello, Waxers, and welcome to the Waxing Lyrical with Mainz and Dutts. I'm your host, Mainz, and my colleague, a man who would never be caught dancing with anyone other than his wife in a bar in Ohio. It's Mr. Neil Dutton. How are we, Neil?
It was important that he unwound and saw his grandkids. So if that's his granddaughter, we have problems.
Right now, it's 4 minutes past 9 on the 7th of October. He isn't fired. That stuns me. As I heard on a podcast, and I can't remember who it was. I think it was Lindsay Jones on the Athletic Football podcast who raised, I thought, an absolutely fantastic point. That's a man who doesn't want to be an NFL head coach. I.e., get me fired.
Yeah, it's someone who thought he could come in and do it exactly as he did in college. And anyone with any degree of sense would have told him it's not. You can't do that. You can't hire racist strength and conditioning coaches. You can't sign joke players who haven't played for 10 years just because they were your mate in college. You can't do that, Urban.
But you also can't. It seems like you can't take days off, right? Like in a different state when your team just lost. This is what I would define as a Steve Spurrier-esque move, right?
The number of people who have said that. People who've been involved in the league for many years, people like Amy Trask, people like that, who've been there, been through every different type of scenario, and they have said they have never known a coach to stay in state when a team went back the next day, because it's not especially when you lose, that process doesn't start the next day. Not in 2021. You can watch the film on the plane.
Correct. So, do you think, and I'm just going to pick a random example, do you think Sean McVay wasn't watching the tape of the game on Sunday?
Absolutely no chance that he wasn't.
And I have a problem with it, but I think all these coaches are actually insane. Like, I don't think it's necessarily good for their mental health, and we've spoke previously to Coach Vermeil, who basically admitted that he was working so hard that he had basically a full-on meltdown when he was at the Philadelphia Eagles. In like the quote-unquote prime of his coaching career. But there's one side or the other. And in the NFL, it's usually the one that works too hard that is successful, not the one who doesn't do any work. And I don't know what he did in that bar in Ohio anyway.
All we know is if it had been a player who'd done what he'd done, stayed, in state because he needed to see his family.
Yeah.
And the video had been caught this. That player's unemployed now.
Correct.
And there's
Absolutely.
no ifs or buts about it. That player is looking for another job. We saw on Hard Knocks some random practice squad that tried to sneak a girl into his hotel room, and he got cut.
Correct. Good point. And I think we have in the past. Mainly probably due to his funky moustache, given Shad Khan a load of grief, but he is a tremendously intelligent man who's made an awful lot of money. His son is also a tremendously intelligent man who's making a lot of money, actually not in football, in wrestling right now. However, I think they wanted someone like Urban Meyer, and I kind of understand the concept when you're in Jacksonville, but right now it looks like a really bad move.
But I don't, as we all know, I don't like to pat myself on the back too often. I called this.
Yeah, I know.
And I've never been proved right after 4 weeks of a season before. I've been proved wrong, but I've never been proved right.
I don't think many people have. But let's get on with the show. This week, couple are plugged into the Mainzers. We look after 4 weeks at some fantasy players and wonder, should we be concerned? We then look at MVP odds and then look at deeper into a couple of teams related to those MVP odds and think, oh God, is one of these teams actually good this time? And then standard for fancy darlings, fancy loser, and our what I like to call fancy prediction of the week, that bound to go wrong. So Neil, let's get on with the show and let's plug into that Mainz. Neil, fantasy players, should I be concerned? So I've got a list of players here, where they are at the moment in kind of in the NFL PPR world, and whether we should be concerned based on where they were drafted. So I'm going to go first, right? First one I've got is DeAndre Hopkins, who is at the moment wide receiver 24, who was being drafted as wide receiver 5. He's being out targeted by AJ Green. That's right, AJ Green. And no, this is 2021, not 2015. Should we be concerned by the amount of work DeAndre Hopkins is getting?
I think we should be concerned because it just looks like that their offense is going to spread out a bit more, and that it is getting closer to the stereotypical air raid scheme, in that no one player is going to get the 30% target share that Nuke has had for the majority of his career. Is he going to have weeks where he'll see more targets than others? Yes, I think he will. I don't know whether he's fully healthy. He's never been like a speed guy. He's never been one of those type of players, but he doesn't look like he's moving at full tilt. So I'd be concerned, especially if you drafted him, let's say, in the top, as the wide receiver 5. You'd obviously be hoping for more production. It started well, start the season, obviously, but that was buoyed by 2 touchdowns. So obviously you have to look and think, is he going to be a wide receiver 1 from here on out? And I can't say for certain that he is, because I think that, as with all things, is it working at the moment for the Cardinals? Yes, it is. Are they going to change? Probably not. So I think he needs injury or things to start to go south for other people for him to start creeping up into the higher target area. So I think we should be concerned with Hopkins. Their schedule moving forward isn't terribly difficult for a fantasy wide receiver. They have the 9th hardest schedule in terms of adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. But I say if he's not going to be the focal point of the passing game, then yeah, I think we can be concerned.
Yeah, it's one of them. It's one of them strange ones, right? Where you're like, okay, they're being good. The Cardinals fans don't care. They win, right? And AJ Green being good is interesting. I think Hopkins may not be fit. I think that's a valid point. I'm a little concerned, I'll be honest. Next one I've got someone I am very concerned with, someone I actually drafted in multiple leagues, and that's Allen Robinson, who at the moment is wide receiver 61. Now we know he's on the Bears, but he's always been on the Bears, and he was ADP 13, and there was just an assumption from our point of view that quarterbacks wouldn't hamper him. They have hampered him this year so far, and unless the Bill Lazor effect starts going to Allen Robinson, this is someone we need to be worried about.
Yeah, you have to be concerned. I mean, obviously he's been dealt a rough break in terms that Andy Dalton was not great. Justin Fields, while Matt Nagy was calling the plays, the handbrake was on. And what we saw last week was how they want to use Fields, when he is the quarterback, they want to run the ball. So they're not going to be a high-volume passing attack. Is Fields probably the most talented quarterback Allen Robinson has ever had throwing the ball? I think you could argue that, and I don't think many people would disagree. But again, let's look what worked for the Bears last week. It was running the ball and restricting the work that Fields had to do. So I don't think we're going to see Robinson rack up 30. Again, he's not going to be racking up like a 30% target share. So now again, we are looking at, how efficient is he going to be with his targets, and is he going to score any touchdowns? And at the moment, it's hard to see that happening as well. This is not the contract year you want to have. Allen Robinson is basically going to have to play out on the tag, go into free agency, and hope his name still carries a lot of value because he's not putting up the numbers. I don't have the advanced metrics in front of me, so I don't know what he's doing on a per-catch, per-target basis, but I assume he's still being Allen Robinson. Again, he's not one of your speed receivers, so he's not someone that you're going to look and say, oh, he's lost a step. We never had it. So, but from a fantasy point of view, I don't think you can drop him, but I certainly don't think I wouldn't go out and trade for him. And he's not someone that I'm desperately getting into my lineup if I have a better option at wide receiver 1 or 2. So he's probably someone that you are going to have to look at for the moment as a wide receiver 3.
Moving to quarterback, his team may be 3-1, but Baker Mayfield at the moment is quarterback 26. Stephen Ruiz and Ben Solak raised a valid point on him last week that usually he has a few bad plays every game, and last week he bundled them all up and played it in one game. You never want to see someone like Odell Beckham Jr. turning round and giving it the arms up in the air as he completely misses him when he's wide open. Should we be concerned about Baker Mayfield?
I think we should be concerned because he's not playing well. From a fantasy point of view, why were you drafting him? Yeah. This was never going to be a winning strategy because we know what they want to do. They want Baker Mayfield to be efficient. Now they're 3-1, and most of their touchdowns have come on the ground. That's a Kevin Stefanski wet dream. He doesn't want 350 passing yards, 5 touchdowns from his quarterback. He wants his quarterback to facilitate the offense, and that means you lean on the ground game. Now, obviously, he'd prefer to not win games 14-7, but from a fantasy point of view, if you drafted Baker Mayfield, you're an idiot. This was always going to be on the cards. He was always going to have weeks where his job was do no harm. I mean, even in shooting out with Patrick Mahomes, did he? He put up some decent numbers, but they got where they got because of the ground game. So, from a real-life point of view, we know now that he's dealing with a shoulder injury. That's a problem. So, are we going to see more games the likes of which we had against Minnesota? Probably. But from a fantasy point of view, if you drafted him, this is your fault. You deal with
it. Someone who we drafted very, very high, like the second in the draft kind of high, is Dalvin Cook. Injuries and, I don't know, that offense. He's running back 31 at the moment. Is this cause for concern, and is it cause for concern due to the offense or due to his health?
It's due to his health, I think, because we've seen in this scheme before, and with Dalvin Cook, that when he is fully healthy, he is the workhorse, he's the engine of this offense. But if he's not going to be healthy, and he's going to split time with Mattison, the problem we have then is that neither of them are usable because they'll eat into each other's time. Now, you would argue that they do not need Dalvin Cook to beat the Detroit Lions. So they should not play Dalvin Cook against the Detroit Lions. They should give him another week to rest up. Now, as a Alexander Mattison fantasy manager, I'd be happy with that. I don't have Dalvin Cook in many places, so I would be happy with another week from Mattison, considering I have Miles Sanders in most of my teams. But his health is a concern. He has played hurt in the past, and obviously we thank him for this. You know, that these people are gladiators. They are going out for our entertainment and amusement, putting their bodies on the line. It does mount up. It does get to a point that, okay, this is one injury too many. I can't play through this. So if he can get a chance to get rested, then I have no doubt that Dalvin Cook will put up viable fantasy numbers because he'll have the backfield to himself, because we've seen they don't want to do a mix and match. They want one running back. But at the moment, if he's going to stay hobbled, it's a worry. And it's a worry because we can't trust Cook. And as I say, you worry then that you can't put Mattison in because, well, what if they're only getting 50% of the carries and then all of a sudden the game goes south and Kirk Cousins has to take to the air? Neither of them are really usable. So it's a worry for Cook from a health point of view, but this is not a... I think this was something we were hoping he was past when we were drafting him.
Last one, Neil, and it only comes about really because of the news coming out today, and that's Calvin Ridley. I think everyone assumed, given the noise, the world that Arthur Smith had in Tennessee, the offense they had played, that Calvin Ridley was in for a massive season. It hasn't happened. He's not playing this week. He's not travelling to London, and he weirdly lives in a world where Cordero Patterson is like wide receiver 2 and running back 5 in the whole of the NFL. Is the Calvin Ridley experience done for this year?
I don't think it's done because, again, you look, he's been getting the workload. He just hasn't been converting it. Now, part of that's a him issue, part of it's a Matt Ryan issue. But we've seen that this offense is broken. And I said it on Twitter and someone laughed at me. Well, he didn't laugh at me, he used a very rude word. That Matt Ryan should be grateful that Ben Roethlisberger is still playing. Because if Ben Roethlisberger goes to the bench, then everyone's eyes are going to look at how close to the cliff Matt Ryan is playing. Now, the problem is that Calvin Ridley isn't the only person in the Falcons' passing game that you can look at and think, oh dear, this is cause for concern. We have Kyle Pitts as well. But more so for Pitts because of the position he plays, and miss me with he's just an offensive weapon. No, he's a tight end. You drafted him to be a tight end. He's not playing a tight end. I know he's ran 5 routes this year as a tight end. But if you actually look in the process of Kyle Pitts, he's run the 3rd most routes of all tight ends. He's seen the 7th most targets, and he's got the 7th most yards. He's the tight end 19. Why? Because he's not scored a touchdown. Well, he's had 6 red zone targets, which is the 2nd most among tight ends. He's only caught 1. If he's still seeing this work, Kyle Pitts is going to catch fire eventually. I'm not saying he's going to finish as the tight end 4, because I just don't think this offense is going to be able to prop him up, especially not if we think Calvin Ridley's going to come back and be a thing again. So the Falcons is one of these offenses at the moment that is sinking all the parts apart from Cordero Patterson, because, as Ian Hartett says, kings stay kings. And, Cordero Patterson can only be contained for so long. But you worry about these pass-catching pieces, because it's not like help is coming over the mountain if they decide we need to make a quarterback change. They're not going to, because there is no other alternative. It's just then a question of, okay, Arthur Smith, you're supposed to be that good, dial something up, change the usage, maximise the usage for these players, because we drafted them high, and we'd like some return on that investment, because that's how selfish we are. We don't know what the personal issue that Calvin Ridley's facing. All we know is, well, that's an Ireland game, start the week. I'm going to have to plug in some no marks I don't want, and I'm going to have to sit down and watch Olamide Zaccheaus take on the New York Jets, when that could have been Calvin Ridley going absolutely nuclear. How dare you?
Let's move on to the next one, Neil. MVP, Neil. It's that time. It's weird because you can't say you're at the quarter mark, because because someone's randomly added an extra game and made maths almost impossible at this point. However, MVP odds start to become relevant in some way, shape or form, and also give you a good jumping off point to talk about teams and players. And I think, favourite at the moment is Kyler Murray. I think not many people expected the Cardinals to beat the Rams last Sunday, especially as they'd lost, I believe, 7 times on the run to the LA Rams. What people definitely didn't expect was the Cardinals to give them an absolute beatdown, which they did. And Kyler Murray is a major part of that, because it's like 3rd and whatever, and he's just like, I'm going to get a first down now, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. And your brain doesn't quite comprehend that he's doing it, because he looks like Marvin the Martian. He's 5'10", but he is unbelievable.
Josh Norris believes that the Kyler Murray zone read inside the red zone, especially near the goal line, is the best play in football at the moment, because I'm not entirely certain how you stop it. He's been excellent. He was excellent last year, if you remember. He got off to the best 10-game start to a season of any fantasy player in history, and then he got hurt and fell down the toilet. He looks like he's doing a good job of minimising the hits he's taking. He's still running around like a mad thing, as you say, like Marvin the Martian, but he's found the sideline to be a bit more friendly place for him, rather than lowering his shoulder and running into linebackers, which is never a good thing to do. It's not that clever. No, he's been great. I'd say he's rightly the favourite because he's been the most consistent. You look at the other people we thought coming into the season would be, the leaders. Patrick Mahomes has had a few plays where you look at him and think, what the hell was that? He's had a few Kirk Cousins moments. Josh Allen, in years to come, and 4 years to come, people will look back on week 1 of the 2021 season and say, the Steelers beat the Bills. How?
Yeah, exactly right.
Because Josh Allen went 2018 bag of sherbet on us. Dak Prescott is not putting up the video game numbers that we expected because he did it last year. So Kyler Murray is standing out because he's done it for 4 games and has been excellent in all 4 of them. However, if I was putting my pound on MVP at the moment, it would not be Kyler Murray. It would be Justin Herbert. Because we have seen him play the different type of game, and he seems to be getting better as the season progresses, as they go into the meat of their schedule. And you just look at the way he's playing. They have made a living this season of targeting Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Well, Mike Williams got one catch for 11 yards in a hostile home environment, and they still won. Because Justin Herbert decided, now we'll go somewhere else. We're okay with this. So, for my money, at the moment, it's between Kyler Murray and Justin Herbert. Although, obviously, I expect the likes of Allen and Mahomes to make a charge as the season progresses.
Yeah, who votes for the MVP?
It's the Associated Press.
Yeah, and what do the Associated Press love?
Narrative.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give to you the 13-4 Dallas Cowboys, led by Dak Prescott, going 6-0 in division because our division is shit. And there is absolutely zero chance that any of our two teams and the New York Football Giants could stop the Dallas Cowboys from scoring 10 points a quarter. And there's no way any of those teams can score 40.
No.
So, they just kind of, I don't know if you watched much of the Panthers game. You probably didn't, because at the same time, Philly were against Kansas City, and you're a sadomasochist and watch that game instead.
The Eagles and the Chiefs were playing basketball.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, but there was at one point there was just this kind of afterburner move from the Dallas Cowboys, and then Trayvon Diggs caught every one of Sam Darnold's passes for about half an hour, and you were like, shit, these could be good. And I'm not 100% sure if it's NFC East good or just good. Now, I think there's a question then to be asked of what's the most an offensive coordinator has ever been paid as a yearly salary to stay as an offensive coordinator so he doesn't become the head coach of another team, because whatever it is, add $1 million on, and that's what Kellen Moore will be getting next year. But I look at it now and I think, well, the only way Prescott doesn't win it, I guess, would be as if he wins comeback player of the year and Murray or someone else continues to do what they're doing. I think it's insane how taken for granted Patrick Mahomes is. Like, he's finding new ways to literally pass the football, and you just go, oh yeah, that's cool, isn't it? Like, we can laugh about the Philadelphia Eagles being unable to cover Tyreek Hill, because it's funny. But it's not that funny, and I'll tell you why. Because Washington play Kansas City in a few weeks, and that sounds like my idea of hell.
Just for reference, as you say about that, Patrick Mahomes this season is 8 for 8 for 32 yards and 3 touchdowns on shovel passes.
I don't even know what that means. It doesn't even make sense. That's what I'm saying. But it's become normalised. He's normalised brilliance. And
This is the problem,
I don't think that's fair to him in an MVP race.
No, this has always been the problem, though, with the coach of the year. Well, the coach of the year every year surely should be Bill Belichick for the last 20 years. But it's always been like he has to go so far above excellent to be in consideration, even though the Patriots are in the Super Bowl or the Final Four every year.
The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, in that example, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers had scored 30 plus points for 9 consecutive games. They didn't score 30 points on Sunday night, and didn't even remotely look like scoring 30 points. And yes, Bill Belichick was on the other side of the fence. If he could draft better, especially at receiver, he may have won. But, whatever. Neil, let's get on with the fancy part of the show, and let's go fantasy, darling.
Hello, darling.
Neil, last week, 1 and 2, you picked Tyler Heineke, winner. 31.97 points, 290 yards, 3 touchdowns, one Jameis Winston-esque punt to F1 McLaren, which I did love, and 43 rushing yards. You picked Evan Ingram. I don't know what he is. I think people say he's a tight end. He's not. But I'm not even...
Don't worry. I can tell you exactly what he is.
But yeah, 7.4 points, 5 catches for 27 yards. And Chuba Hubbard, 9.1 points, 57 yards, and only 2 catches for 14, which is surprising because up until midway through the third quarter, it was still a game, but he didn't get as much rub as we thought was going to happen. So I guess, Neil, over to you. Who's your first darling for this week? First
darling this week is Sam Darnold. Now, as we know, as soon as you get out from under Adam Gase, you become a legend. Your powers are amplified. So obviously he's 4 games into his career without Adam Gase, and I think he's the quarterback 4 in terms of fantasy. He leads the NFL in rushing touchdowns, not quarterbacks. He leads the NFL in rushing scores.
My understanding is he's the first quarterback in NFL history to have 5 rushing touchdowns after 4 games. The first quarterback ever.
Yeah. So not Lamar, not Cam Newton, not
Michael Vick, not Steve Young, not Randall Cunningham, no.
Not Steve Grogan.
Sam Darnold.
The Eagles, obviously week 1 they played the rotting corpse of Matt Ryan, but since then they've given up an average of 23.8 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. They've allowed 9 touchdown passes with just 1 interception. So if you have to start Sam Darnold this week, I don't think it's a bad thing.
Darling number 2, please, Neil.
Darling number 2 is Dawson Knox. Now he's still, despite the fact he scored a touchdown in 3 consecutive games and has 4 in 3 games, and is the tight end 4 on the season, he is still criminally underused. And I think it's because people must think, well, no, the Bills just play 4 wide receivers, so Dawson Knox doesn't play. Well, you're fools. So Dawson Knox this week is playing the Chiefs. The Chiefs are playing the Bills. Yes, that's right. This is the game of the season. This is another basketball-esque scoreline incoming. And the Chiefs have been absolutely shite against tight ends all year. They're allowing 6.7 receptions for 87 yards per game. They gave up 5 for 56 and a touchdown to Dallas Goedert last week. So Dawson Knox, probably after this week, when he goes off again, is going to become far too well owned for me to even write about in my streamers article, and for which I will mourn. But for this week, get him in.
I love the idea that you're saying that the Kansas City Chiefs are shit against one specific area of offense, whereas I've watched them and they're just shit against all areas. But yeah, okay. Final fantasy darling, Neil. Final fantasy
darling is Damian Williams. Now, you may remember him as the rightful winner of the MVP award when the Kansas City Chiefs won the Super Bowl. But hey, he's not a quarterback. David Montgomery looked like he'd suffered a really bad injury. He's still going to be missing for a few weeks. It's not as serious as it looked. So while they're probably going to work in Khalil Herbert and, I don't know, any other backs they've got there, none of which particularly excite me, I think Damian Williams is going to be the lead back for the Bears. They're playing the Raiders this week. The Raiders have allowed the 10th most rushing yards this season and 6 rushing touchdowns. They're also giving up 5 running back receptions per game. So Williams is, he's no slouch as a receiver. So assuming he gets the bulk of the work, I think he could be an RB2 solid flex option this week. Because, again, we've seen what the Bears want to do. They want to probably going to try and limit Justin Fields, rely on him making splash plays, and give the ball to the running back. And that'll be Damian Williams this week.
Fantastic, Neil. Let's move on to Fancy Loser.
Fancy loser this week, again, it's not really a question of a loser. It's just you have to temper your expectations in what you're going to get from him. And to be fair, I think you've probably been a bit disappointed anyway. That's Nick Chubb. Now, the Browns are playing the Chargers this week. The Chargers defensively have been exceptional all year. You look across all the positions in terms of adjusted fantasy points allowed to all of them. They're not letting anyone really have their way with them. They are giving up a lot of yards on the ground, but as John Barshard will tell you, yards don't matter, and they certainly don't matter in fantasy football. We want touchdowns. Now, Nick Chubb, as I say, at the start of the season, where are we here? He was drafted as the running back 9. He's currently the running back 12, which I think would stun a lot of people because, it's like, well, when did he do this? But ultimately, this was the risk you took. You know that Kareem Hunt was going to get the passing down work. You know that they were going to mix and match in the red zone. So ultimately, I just don't think it's going to be a Nick Chubb game. I think it's going to be, I'm not going to say a shootout because I think both teams' defenses are very good. I think it's going to be too tight for Chubb to get the type of volume that he's going to need to be a difference maker in fantasy this week.
For those who care, Neil nailed his fancy loser last week. It was Ryan Tannehill, quarterback 17. He got 20 points and he got beat by the flipping Jets, which should come with fireable offences for many people.
Do you know the Titans ran 96 offensive plays?
Yeah, like Derrick Henry had 74 of them. Derrick Henry is on target now, on pace to have more rushing carries this year than he did in his final year of high school when he had like 492.
He had all of them.
At present, he has 14 receptions. His career high for a season is 19.
Smashing it.
They are not afraid to give him all the points, and they do not care about his long-term future as a human.
No.
That's it on the loser, Neil. Let's move on to our fancy predictions of the week, bound to go wrong. Breaking news: we suck at this. 0-8 so far. I mean, we're trying to do big things, so that's technically allowed. But even so, last week I said Kyler Murray would rush for 75 yards and 2 touchdowns versus the Rams. That's a loss. He only had 39 yards, although I was right that he'd be great. Never mind. You said Sony Michel will be running back 5. He had minus 0.9 points. I'm not even sure how you were able to do that.
He fumbled.
So we ran for a yard and fumbled? Or
pretty much.
Oh my god. Anyway, I'm going to go first this week. I'm going back to rushing quarterbacks. I was a bit nervous about this, but then I've just got a sleeper app notification to tell me that Jimmy Garoppolo missed his second day of practice. Stuff him. And his Alex Smith ways. Trey Lance is a top 5 scoring quarterback this week. That doesn't necessarily mean he's going to throw it a lot. But if you love weird and wonderful running games, get yourself involved in watching San Francisco this week because it's going to be epic. The Cardinals have been very, very good this year. One thing they haven't been good at is stopping the run. An issue when coming up against a Kyle Shanahan team.
Can be.
Just so you know, if San Francisco lose this week, we're going to have that discussion because he's below 500. And people keep on telling me, and I keep on telling people, that he's a genius. Neil, what is your fancy prediction?
Fancy prediction this week is that the Buffalo Bills will have 2 top 12 wide receivers and a top 5 fantasy tight end in their matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs. So it'll be Diggs, Manny Sanders and Dawson Knox will all go off.
You are seeing that? Are you suggesting that is one to stay up for?
It would be if I was young enough to stay up.
I was talking about this with Colin Squires on the Touchdown Review podcast, where we're in some kind of strange world where all the games in the time frame which we want them are crap, and all the late games, although 9 o'clock isn't necessarily late, it is for old folks like me and you, Neil, when it gets to midnight, are the good games. So tonight, as we record, you've got Rams against Seahawks, you've obviously got Bills against Chiefs, you've got Browns against Chargers, I think you've got Cardinals against 49ers, all latest games. Not fun, Neil, not fun.
Not
a lot of watching games later on in the day and in the morning afterwards too. Neil, that's the end of the show. Where can people catch you until we're back next week?
Till we're back next week, I'm on Twitter at ndutton13. You can read my stuff at Numberfire, at Rotoviz, and at 4for4 Football. And I'm not sure the deal because, usually we talk about the London games, but we didn't bother this year. Good. So I don't know with regards the coverage, what's happening with the TalkSport show. So I know Nat is going to be hosting the BBC coverage of the Jets Falcons. So I don't know who's hosting TalkSport and whether they're going to play my fantasy darlings. I hope they do because I've already done the damn things. But if you listen out, you'll hear a bit more deeper analysis on the 3 must starts that I would give this week.
Fantastic, Neil. As always now, I hosted the Touchdown Review podcast that came out earlier in the week. We talked college with Ollie Hodgkinson. It's a massive game, 5 p.m. Saturday. Red River rivalry, Texas versus Oklahoma. One of the biggest games in the country, and you should watch, and Ollie will explain why. I spoke to Callum about the Brady Bowl and how real the Cardinals are. I spoke to Thomas Willoughby about Atlanta, whether that be against Washington or obviously he's going to London to watch the game. And then spoke to Joe Valenzuela about his Browns and how we think there may be a glimmer of hope for the Giants. Give it a listen. I would highly recommend it. That is it for this week. Enjoy the late games. Get your coffees out because you're going to need them if you're staying up. If you're not, get your Game Pass and condense game 40 minutes and see how many you can catch up before you get caught by your boss on Monday. Until this time next week, these top guys are out.